Okay, yeah, I'm going to get a quick lighting here on this, and I started making a video. I was wanting to include some information and involving this. It is a Lexus LFSA compact concept. The thing with this is that it's like really the coolest, and as far as I'm concerned, what I looked at, throughout the years. But it seemed to be, ultimately originating my interest that way because of, like the smart for two smart car that Mercedes-Benz in Houston, Texas area, Sugar Land, Texas, predominantly the closest one that I, preferred to go to anyway. But Mercedes-Benz is a distributor back in the 80s and early 90s. I think it pretty close to the year 2000. I haven't been there in quite some time or even looked, but anyway, the Lexus LFSA compact concept is like real impressive in a way. When I looked at the Smart for Two smart car, I went out there specifically, really truthfully, because of the alphanumerics 71 in Pearland, and the thing about the all the alphanumerics and linguistics and practical application of principle integration, compatibility and analytical and all that stuff. But anyway, yeah, so like it ultimately got to the thing that had ultimately led to obviously the Chevrolet Silverado Z71 thing, and the alphanumerics 213 and telepathic brain waves, and the Los Angeles area code, as well as other factors in the Houston, Texas area, and in the Galveston area that way. But anyway, I went there and I test drove a Smart for Two smart car, okay? But because smart, yes, is also likewise a term used with the Centerpoint Energy smart meter, measuring kilowatts per hour. As far as I know, as far as electrical, that's all I've ever known. But I've been getting other information. And, the thing it is about the smart meter with Centerpoint, I had called NRG and trying to get over the thing about Reliant, and straight into my thought about the degree privileged NRG thing about it, as well as the NRG football stadium of the Houston Texans. And, I mean, if it's ultimately, once again, it seems to be the deal about non-negotiable, non-transferable itemization of what non-degreed is, or degreed, or non-degreed, or degreed level of like rebel standards of consensual participation that really give the impression of like, the equator and the operator that way. And energy being the acronym and all that. And my thought of like the International Electronic Engineering, the big O thing about the organization. And there was certain information involving geographic information systems in NRG, and other factors involving the impression of like what would give the impression of like international financial management, which at the beginning and first, like Data Foundry was providing information pretty much about the SAN software, which is pretty much about the information on the website for Data Foundry, managing international financial management that way with the SAN software. But progressively, Data Foundry had changed to what seemed to be like, getting into the tower or power type of issue with like on-site co-location, and the structure of like what stacks of networking would only mean more so of hardware than the thought of like software or an electronic as compared to electrical side, and the power as compared to principle, the power and principality thing about the the difference between electrical and electronic that way, as compared to what NRG, in my mind is obviously my thought a difference of, between the relaying energy, or a pi r squared factor as compared to exponential quotients. Powers of multiplication. But in any case, I went out there and to Mercedes-Benz for several reasons, but predominantly just to test drive that back in the 80s, and I think it was like somewhere around 2000, the year 2000, I went back out there. But yeah, about the smart car, and was actually looking at likewise the Scion IQ and the Saturn Sky. Saturn Sky, my thing about Saturn, the colors of the rainbow, as well as the International Electronic Engineering color codes that way of electrical and electronic. And Saturn Sky being about the rainbow, and my thing about the Chevrolet Geoprism and the prism presenting the colors of a rainbow measured in nanolumens like a diamond, as well as a prism. And what that is to a rainbow, or like Orion Performance Monitoring, the cover once again of the book cover presenting the hot air balloons. And the thing about the hot air balloons with a difference of temperature and altitude would present the condensation and evaporation, which is pretty much the condensation and mist, and like a requirement of a rainbow anyway. Yet all the different balloons on the book cover, and it is, I mean, to me, I mean, it is the book about, you know, Orion Performance Monitoring with those hot air balloons, about quite a bit about the, you know, some idea in my mind of like pi r squared, you know, of exponential of addition as compared to exponential quotients of powers of multiplication at a degree level, you know, beyond, you know, the executive classroom, and practice, and all that practice makes perfect stuff about all that. But yeah, so like I was thinking about that because you know, when I was looking at this, you know, once again, you know, this is like cool, and this is like, you know, I've been like really focusing on the thought of SSI, Supplemental Security, and the ISS, like the International Space Station. And before I get into like whether, you know, International Space Station would represent maybe just like communications in a way of what you know, international banking systems, and what all is involved with like the thought of like International Space Station as compared to, you know, just the thought of like television stations or communications, or what that is as a circuit, or but anyway, you know, in that way, you know, it's kind of like thinking about something about that in the acronym itself of the, you know, the SSI and ISS and International Superstar, and you know, Superstar Intelligence or Investment, or whatever the case may be. The thing it is that the thought of like a SSI, or, you know, benefits in a way that would like present the issue, like once again, of like a non-taxable income that originate from the thought of something that had been given as a given. If it's just something of categorization of annuity, representative of maybe what even a grant might be perceived as. I mean, if it's like in the same category, you know, well, there it is. And the thing with it is, it seemed like really, you know, a rid of the thing about a student loan. Okay, it seemed to be like the forbearance. Likewise, based upon, you know, its point of distribution or placement of, you know, where it's coming from or going to, is really the issue between forbearance that way. It's not considered a penalty, forbearance involving a student loan, yet it seemed to be like really, I mean, at this point, really, who's kidding who about a writ of habeas corpus or litigation, why litigation is not de facto, or, you know, the thought that litigation is really a corporate term. Normally the thought and perception of corporate terminology would represent maybe the thought of more so of annuity than a settlement. Yet, I mean, it seemed to be like really the difference of like what corporate venue is really ultimately getting to, ultimately in my mind, even a principle of like a EBT, an electronic benefits transfer, which is, you know, I've seen the card involving like benefits for like food, originating, you know, in combination with like Health and Human Services, involving, you know, like Medicaid, or the thought of like maybe just not like a source of income in a way that would present maybe, you know, I wouldn't necessarily call it a financial handicap or an impediment based upon, I mean, if it's only a point of origin as transfer, or whether or not if like immigration's customs enforcement is really maybe the thought or issue of like only what an acronym might mean to, you know, exchange commission, or maybe the thought of maybe an alternative means of maybe disregarding or placing responsibility in a way, a proper English numerical composition as an easement, sometimes associated with like what international law dictates quite a bit in motion picture anyway, about international floating accounts, or, you know, the thought of like intellectual easements originating a source of like royalties that way, which could also be considered maybe the thought of like a type of a grant or a given, or annuity. I mean, it's all kind of, I mean, it's ultimately seeming to be something about the either having earned or a given or a grant or annuity, based upon generations. It's almost like an employment gaining, you know, like a supplemental security income based upon, you know, participation in what experience is. But ultimately, it seems to be the issue of, you know, a period of time when it seems to be like when non-taxable income becomes, you know, principle of like whether or not if whether it being earned or not, who's given the distribution. And I mean, if the word has to be represent, I mean, like a forbearance would normally involve, you know, more so of a student as compared to the thought of a grant would be maybe a source of, you know, maybe, I mean, if a student loan is ultimately identifying or geographically attached in a source, I mean, if it's really an issue of currency, I mean, if like money or the categorization of money itself isn't really thought of as normally identified, I mean, a Pell Grant normally gives the impression of you know, an educational system that would reflect predominantly, ultimately, you know, a major university, and automatically, you know, that's not limited to, you know, the thought of you know, North America. I mean, obviously, it's like a worldwide issue, and whether a student knows it or not, or really, I mean, it seems to be like really whether or not if the thought of like writs of habeas corpus is ultimately getting to programming in television. I mean, the same way of a university, or the thought of pi r squared as a scale of non-negotiable, non-transferable itemization in a 9-degree situation, or what classified ads are based upon like a foreknowledge of like a participation, or, you know, I'm not sure if I would even use the word demographics as compared to maybe a libertarian that would maybe distinctly know a little bit more so of a Republican side maybe than a demographic, or some idea of degree level that would be, you know, I wouldn't necessarily call it immunity based upon certain factors that represent anatomy, although the impression of a principle being immune would maybe suggest maybe the thought of maybe a protected freedom and not affected by any conditions or requirements or participation that would be thought of maybe having the parents thereof, but whether or not if it's the thought of like having a form of godness but denying the power thereof, or, you know, some biblical reference in a way, because it's ultimately getting into, you know, whether or not if money is going to represent the U.S. dollar or currency, and circuit over the categorization of you know, every money on you know, including the World Bank and the 12 Federal Reserve Banks, in a way of like even, you know, religion in the 12 tribes of Israel, the way of you know, different types of money involving like even the English Parliament, or, you know, does the English pound look the same as the U.S. dollar, the English pound, or the E equal MC squared, or the Euro dollar, and the 7 monies in the 7 nations of Europe, and, you know, all that libertarian stuff that might equate to some idea and thought of like the Statue of Liberty in a way of like what New York only means to like you know, I don't know if I would call it comparable to like the English Parliament representing maybe a moat around a kingsmanship that might reflect maybe, I mean, if it just has to be a judicial or jurisprudence, or the thought of maybe a misappropriation of allocation in a way of the Mississippi, and what that is to, you know, like Plymouth Rock or the Delta Force in the Triangle, representing, you know, schematic of the Delta being a triangle and electronic and electrical that way, identifying some thought of like the Delta Force in the biggest mouth of the river, and, you know, some idea of like Plymouth Rock, you know, likewise, and the thought of like, you know, even Lee Iacocca's accepted speech of the century, you know, beyond the front lines of the beachfront, and some Halo Dinu, some like all that white stuff on his toilet, and I mean, ultimately it gets to the Hi-O Silver deal, okay, but like once again, you know, I was thinking about that, and back to the original deal is ultimately I was kind of like thinking about this as far as like something about the supplemental security. I mean, it would have to be like my thought, what DinersClub would be, I mean, somewhere in alphanumeric linguistics that has really gotten to the point, I mean, really considerable, you know, 25, 30 years, I mean, really since June of 1992, and really it seemed to be like an ongoing, you know, thing that really that I've taken, you know, a direct interest in, because, you know, it's, you know, after years of it, it seemed to be like grasping more, broader, faster, quicker, more concentrated and content and direction, and a more, you know, I wouldn't really call it broad based upon, you know, any thought of like diluting the value, because it's really not that, but it seems to be increasing speed and comprehension in a way of like involving alphanumerics and linguistics. as compared to linguistics, on major universities. I haven't seen any combine or really anything about alphanumerics on major universities, or any combine or combination of alphanumerics and linguistics that way of practical application and principle, and ultimately, getting, to the degree level representatives of constitutional participation into, the thought of the power as compared to, the principle being, my thought of like pi r squared, or some non-negotiable deal of color code and space declaration, or state statutes annotated in a way of, some idea of like some family name on a black dot on a map, or, some chronological issue between like a Remo black dot drumhead to the Aquarium power white dot. And, in the Houston area, like once again, it's ultimately getting to my thoughts of like the drum shop that was there at Chimney Rock, okay? And like, before Univision actually built like right there on the West Loop 610 at Highway 59, on the outer side of West Loop 610 at Highway 59. It's like when Univision actually built their television station there, they had 4 colors, 3 pastels and a black, and towards the end, I mean, it's like I wasn't even like really even looking for anything like that, other than just glancing by as driving by, and didn't even like register as like noticing that like immediately or anything about it. I mean, at all. But years later, before they actually and there's somewhere in the transition between like KLOL 101.1 FM radio on Lovett Street in the Montrose area, there was a transition, and it seemed to me like that's when Univision kind of had taken its place there on West Lip, is when a transition of management between KLOL 101.1 FM radio transitioned to, I believe it was a Latin American managing factor of like music on the radio with the same 101.1. In any case, yeah. So I mean, like that's when I really, and I didn't even connect it to like Univision and all that, but like Univision's like, as far as I know, it's not there now. And there was like another factor of like 3D International on West Loop 610 at the corner of Westheimer, more so on the southwest outer side of at the corner of like a West Loop 610, 3D International. It seemed to be a significant factor in the way of like what's around in that area as compared to like Chase and Capital One out there off of Westheimer, and other factors. And yeah, so like 3D International had its thing about the automatically in my mind the 2D ISO 3D, the 2-dimensional isometrics and 3-dimensional thing about the seemingly my thoughts of like isometrics involving blueprints, or what that is in actual participation. My thought of even going beyond a normal daily standard transaction and method of banking, and it seems to be like obviously something that I really hadn't been ignoring yet. Directing attention beyond banking itself would be probably I already thought of like doing that to the trail photos. Everybody's like, you got to be kidding me at this point. So anyway, it seems to be like the thing about the reserve reverse in the Pentagon, or some idea of like some quarter and a 200-year celebration is ultimately getting, this is the year 2023, okay? And I'd mentioned some information about like Richard Nixon, former President Richard Nixon, and I've been focusing quite a bit on like quadrants being like a quarter. And the tennis court in a way of like Abraham Lincoln, the only person studied in the dark, and the Lincoln Continental and the rectangle, and the hood ornament itself in like a quarter, a quadrant of the tennis court, and the marginal spread the way of like Y2K, and how 2 tennis players represent really like numbers like region 0 and region 1 of like even binary numbers that way in I-10. Of sequencing, characterization, and says before, because I mean, it's called a singles game, yet there's 2 people on there. I mean, it's like the Y2K thing, okay? It's like 1 letter, but the Y2K thing is like in combination with alphanumerics, as compared to numerical individually and then alphanumeric combined. I mean, it ultimately gets to like the alphanumerics of 94, and ultimately the paper-made thing of 56 is 10, based upon pronunciation and combination between pronunciation, alphanumerics, and the numerical value as compared to alphanumeric new value. But it seems to be like, whether or not if the Roe v. Wade is only the idea of pronunciation between the spelling of roe being R-O-E, predominantly a lot of it's like, hey man, you got it all wrong. You know, it's like you really saw it on the news anyway, okay? I mean, you really saw it on the news. That's like a ROWE and 61 in news. It's like a miracle, right? But like you were like watching it, right? And you saw it on television, right? Like the alphanumeric's 130, right? Like an electronic god, right? In television and all that stuff about Washington, right? And that DC acronym of like direct circuitry and dimensionally clause, you know, like a degree level, like whether or not the operator and the equators really ultimately get in between, you know, whether or not the degree level is only the issue of like what having fair use of non-degreed, you know, issues might only mean to, you know, some idea of like intellectual or, you know, an easement of international law. Or, you know, what that is to like LexisNexis search engine involving, you know, not limited to international law. And it seems to be like whether or not if like a local area network or a wide area network or a World Wide Web is going to be an issue of whether if version is only presenting maybe the thought of maybe a dimensional clause based upon distribution of like what a provider might only mean to a data involving, you know, like hotspots and Wi-Fi connectivity or internet connectivity in a way of what Wi-Fi is or is not, or what a webmaster and a Wi-Fi manager ultimately mean to a local area network, or some idea of maritime law of liquid equity as some thought of like maybe an overabundant amount of, you know, the thought of like the significance of simply and easily being replaced in a way. What liquid equity normally represents, like, I mean, like anyway, not that liquidation is ultimately getting to the thought of foreclosure, not limited to, likewise, maybe the thought of maybe, I mean, if it's ultimately getting to maybe a constellation of having managing factors over an abundant amount that would maybe supplement maybe a differentiation between a projected estimate as an option and future of what only liquid equity might only mean to human capital, or, you know, some idea of like a constellation, not, you know, experiencing, you know, a constellation is not experiencing, you know, the thought of like a depreciation, not necessarily anything other than this terminology seems to be like a non-degreed issue, like terminology of like depreciation, and only in real estate. I mean, you know, really, I don't think I've heard it anywhere in commercial law involving commercial buildings or high-rise or even stationary engineering or any type of position, not even on television, involving depreciation. It seemed to be like really whether or not, I mean, if ultimately it's getting to a method of banking. I mean, if it's ultimately getting to the thought of like an introductory preface of what depreciation only means as the thought of whether or not if it's ultimately getting to, like, you know, like I was referring to a little bit earlier about like a student loan, providing, you know, what seems to be, you know, why litigation is not necessarily de facto, or the thought of like writs of habeas corpus in the form of litigation as compared to maybe why a writ of habeas corpus would present the issue why Fifth Amendment is not a non-profit organization. Well, I mean, is that really the ultimate deal about a student loan, ultimately resulting in whether or not if forbearance is only the thought of like a legal median deposition and identifying, you know, all the certain conditions and factors involved. Maybe even identifying what might even be the thought of an exchange commission, identifying maybe even a circuit in a way of like what money might only give the impression of as categorization, or maybe the thought of maybe a non-negotiable way of importing and exporting. You know, really an everyday standard transaction at the bank of, you know, like who's paying attention to their own information, or, you know, what's available as you know, the thought of any claim, some thought of FDIC claim, in a way of like some thought of like whether a patent pending is only the thought of raising a bar. You know, it's like you know, once again the baritone, and you know, it's like excuse me, getting to that thought of oh, it's that time again. Oh yeah, I'm having. Yeah, I'm having that thing. So anyway, I'm gonna have to
take a quick break here. So, yeah. Alright, I'll get back with you in a minute.